Good morning. Good to have you all here. And we're delighted to have Ed McCabe here. Ed and I go way back. We actually went to school together. As you'll tell in a minute, he's younger than I am, just by the looks. But for the past 35 years, Ed McCabe has served in a variety of sales and sales leadership roles with the healthcare industry. In the past 20 years, he worked for Medtronic. He's the leader of the medical device technology, and most recently has served as vice president, corporate accounts with the Restorative Therapies Group. So in this role, he led a team that managed the RTG business strategy in relationship with Medtronic's largest national customer groups, totaling about $1.7 billion. So after his retirement in October of 2020, Ed was asked to assume a newly created position as Director of People for Milestone, which is the largest home services company within the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So in his new role, he is focused on leadership development, which will expand to the coaching and mentoring of their management team. And he graduated from Evangel in 1981 with a BS in education. He was also a part of the Originals football program, where he learned on almost weekly basis that winning is not everything. And so Ed met his wife, Pam, while attending Evangel, and in June they were celebrating 40 years of marriage. So Ed and Pam have 4 children, 5 grandchildren, and have plans for many, many more grandchildren, and they currently reside in McKinney, Texas. There will be a Q&A during this, so make sure you got your questions ready, but please welcome Ed McCabe.
So I went to school with Robert. I had a wonderful time at Evangel. Candidly, I'm surprised that I graduated, to be very honest with you. I remember that I was not the best student. I got in my fair share of trouble. I don't have time to go into all of those things today. But let me just kind of give you a brief synopsis of what I want to talk about today. What I really want to share with you is really 9 things that I've learned over the course of a business career. And you might say, like, why do you pick 9 things? And I said, well, I was a PE major, and I was a football player, so I have to keep it simple, something that's easily understood for me, because my mind is very limited. I wasn't a business major like Robert, so my intellectual capacity is very limited. But essentially what I'm going to share with you is the stuff I wish someone would have told me when I was at Evangel. I wish that someone would have sat me down, like where you are today, and had a conversation with me about these 9 things and how important they are, not only to you personally, but also professionally. So here's the list of the 9 things. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about them because we're going to talk about them individually. But the first and most important thing, honestly, it seems kind of trite. It almost seems like it's redundant, but make your boss look good. So what does that mean? Show up for work on time. Be dressed appropriately. Take pride in what you wear to work. Make sure that your hair is fixed, you're clean shaven, whatever that looks like, make sure that you do that. Make sure that you become a master of whatever that role is, right? Make sure that there's no drama. I'll tell you a quick story about something that happened. My first sales job, I got the opportunity to go to Lake Tahoe for this national sales meeting. And I remember there was a cocktail reception after the dinner that night. And I remember vividly standing in this big ballroom, and the CEO of the company was here. The VP of sales right here. I was right here. I was brand new trying to take it all in. And there's this guy comes stumbling up, and he's had way too much to drink, way overserved. He starts saying all these inappropriate things, and about 3 or 4 minutes later, this guy stumbles off. So I remember the CEO leaning over to the VP of sales and saying something. I didn't know what he said. And then about a few minutes later, when the CEO left, I leaned over to the VP of sales, and I said, what did he say? Was it something in reference to this guy and the fact that he was obviously drunk? And he said, make sure he's not here next year. So your actions have implications. Make sure that you're making your boss look good by how you conduct yourself each and every day. And also, I want you to think about this one thing. Social media has an impact on what people think about you. Think about yourself as a brand, right? If I were to walk through this room today and talk to you guys individually and say, what do people say about you? They might say, well, I got a nice jump shot, or I'm a really good student, or, I've got nice hair, I dress really nice. Whatever that might be, you have a reputation that carries over from what happens on social media. Make sure that what you're doing on social media does not embarrass you. Right now, as the director of people, I have responsibility for HR, and we're constantly hiring people. Our company's growing dramatically, Milestone is. But even before, in every position that I've had, I've gone online to look and see what does that person's social media profile look like? And how is that going to be a good fit for our company? Are y'all feeling this? You understand what I'm saying? It's very, very, very important. The other thing I want to share with you too is as it relates to leadership, always, always, always publicly agree with your leadership and follow leadership's direction. You don't want to contradict what leaders are doing. You want to have that conversation privately. I think it's showing respect for your leader, whether you disagree with him or not, that you owe it to that person to have a conversation about whatever that directive is or whatever their mission is or whatever. You have that conversation privately to honor that leader, because someday you're going to be a leader. And it's hard to get alignment with people. So you want to make sure you have a conversation. It's done privately if you disagree. Once leadership is established what the direction is going to be, you fall in line and support that. Make sense, y'all? All right. Servant leadership. Okay, so you guys have all heard the song, right? Drake, one of the great philosophers of our world, right? You got Socrates, Plato, Drake, maybe The Weeknd. Well, let me ask a question, okay? I'm just going to digress for just a second. Why does The Weeknd, why would he pick a name like The Weeknd for a stage name? Anybody have any idea? Can you explain to me why? And why does he not spell it correctly? Does he not know it's W-E-E-K-E-N-D? You guys should know. You listen to his music, right? Does anybody know why? Was he born on a Saturday? I mean, why would he call himself The Weeknd? I don't know. But the question is, I've learned a lot. My wife and I had this conversation and said, how are you going to make this relevant for folks? And I said, well, I'm going to try to take songs and lyrics and try to play that into it. And you're probably wondering, like, what does this mean? I got enemies, got a lot of enemies. As it relates to business, what you're going to find is that there are people that are all about themselves. They're not going to share ideas with you. They're going to steal your ideas. They're going to look to take every opportunity to try to create an advantage for themselves and put a disadvantage upon you, essentially. And what I want to say is, don't be that person. I believe with all my heart that the Christian faith, and if you live by Christian principles, you will distinguish yourself in the business community, because most people don't operate that way. And people will look at you automatically and recognize that you're different. So be transparent. Share your ideas with other people. Make sure that you're open. And as a Christian leader, that you're doing things differently. Christian leaders, this whole idea, concept of servant leadership is meant to be that you're going to serve your team. Your team comes first before yourself. Great leaders provide great service. I want to leave you with this thought as it relates to servant leadership, and it's this, is that great leaders listen, learn, and then lead. Right? I'm going to repeat it again. Great leaders listen, learn, and then lead. You cannot distinguish between the professional and the personal in the business world. There's not this you can't distinguish between those two. If you're going to be a great leader, you have to invest in your people personally. You have to understand them. You have to understand what their goals are. Learn about their families. I'm going to talk in a minute about one of the early managers I had and the influence that he had on my life. But I remember vividly learning about this and not understanding what servant leadership was when I was a sales rep back in the mid-'80s in Memphis, Tennessee, and I had a boss. His name was Charlie Williams. I was working for the Evangel division of C.R. Bard as a sales rep, and I remember after we had our second child, Lacey, he said, Ed, I've got a lake house. I know you guys got to be probably tired. Why don't you just here's the keys, go use my boat, everything I have at the lake house, go up there and stay a weekend on me. And it was really impressive to me that he would just take the time to understand that I was tired. I was staying up all night with the baby and with Pam, and he would offer up his lake house to me. I remember every year he would take Pam and I out to eat dinner at the nicest place in Memphis. It was called Folks Folly, if any of you are from Memphis here. Folks Folly. And we would have this great dinner. We would all be dressed up, and he would take the time to talk to my wife and to me and tell me what a great person I was to have on his team and how I impacted the business positively, all in front of my wife. And so that was really impactful to me. So you got to understand that if you're going to be a great leader, you have to invest in people. You have to understand what motivates them and get to know them personally. It's very, very important. The next thing I want to talk about is about college debt. It's going to get real here, y'all. How many of you here have debt, college debt? Just raise your hand. It's okay. We're going to be honest with each other. One of the things that Pam and I do is we do premarital counseling in our church, and we also do marital counseling. And the number one issue in people that are having marital problems is finances. I talk to so many people almost on a weekly basis at Milestone because one of the things I'm really passionate about is teaching people about planning for retirement. We're going to talk about that in just a second because it's never too soon to start. But my point is that people come in to talk about the amount of college debt that they have. So can I just talk to you for just a second as if I'm your dad? Would that be okay? Please don't throw anything at me. But what I've learned over the course of time is that most people were just like me. I came to college and I graduated from college and no one ever sat me down and talked about debt and finances and how you should manage that and just learn on your own. And you make all kinds of mistakes. Credit card debt. I mean, I remember one time Pam and I had $25,000 worth of credit card debt. I remember early on because, literally I was real poor. And so I remember when we had our first apartment, we went out and bought everything on credit. New color TV, new stereo, a car. And then pretty soon it got real because we had more bills than we had money. And there was tremendous pressure on our marriage because of that. So I want to ask you to think about these things. I'm going to talk about two different options, all right? If I were your father and I were talking to you today, I want you to stop and think. If you're graduating and you've already accumulated this debt, I want you to think about the next 3 to 5 years. And I want you to think about this. Live beneath your means. Pay your tithes and then pay yourself and try to knock your debt out. That may mean that you may have to move back home for a while. That may mean that you live in an apartment that's a studio apartment and it's not very nice. Maybe you drive your beater car for a few more years. But you've got to knock that debt out. You can't have it hanging over your head. And there are some of you here that maybe you're not graduating this year, but you're looking at your debt and you're saying, wow, that's a lot of money. And I want you to stop and think about what is the job that you're going to have after you graduate and what's it going to pay? And how does that contrast with what you owe? If you're going to be a school teacher and you're going to make 40 grand, 50 grand a year, and you have $50,000 worth of school debt, you need to tap the brakes, y'all, and think about that. You might need to drop out of school for a semester or a year and work. You might need to think about picking up a job at night. Because I'm going to tell you, you're not going to remember the college experience if every month you're paying $700 a month or $600 a month towards your school bill and you're struggling. That's a house payment. That's a couple of car payments. So again, as your surrogate dad today, I want to ask you to take a step back and think about that because your debt is going to impact what happens in the future. Here's the other thing I want you to think about. There's going to be job opportunities that you might have to have there might be some risk involved in it, but you want to do that. I remember back in 1986, I had the opportunity, I was working, again, at Evangel, and I had these different options I was looking at. I was a sales rep, and I had these relations with these orthopedic spine doctors. And I had a guy that approached me that was in business in Memphis. He said, hey, I'd like for you to go in business with me. He goes, you've got all these relationships. He said, but we're going to have to split this debt. We're going to have to borrow about $250,000. So each of us will be on the hook for about $125,000. And I didn't do it because I had another opportunity that I felt like was better. Well, my point was, I could have done that if I wanted to because we didn't have a lot of debt at that time. The other thing I want you to think about is this, is that I talked to my pastor, and I'll share the story at the end, about there's so many people that God is moving you in a different direction. Maybe it's ministry or maybe it's something else, but you can't do that because you're in debt. So your level of debt is going to impact the decisions that you make, and I want you to take it very seriously. I say all that in love too, guys. Just trying to be real with you today. The other thing I want to say as I close is that there's this picture that's depicted as it relates to hip-hop music, social media, television, all these things, and they make you think that everybody is just loaded. Is that not true? Everybody's got a nice car. You watch a TV program, everybody's got this beautiful home. They wear super nice clothes. They're traveling all the time, all this stuff, and it's just not true. You need to realize that life is not what's depicted in media. Life is radically different, and you need to take control of your own life and your future so that you can have options. I told all my kids growing up, the number one thing I want you to always have is options. Don't ever paint yourself into an area where you cannot move. And debt is one of those things. Okay? Cool? Didn't want to sound like a lecture. Got real quiet in here, y'all. The next thing I want to talk about, it's not too early to talk about, is retirement and compounding interest and the power of time. So one of the things I'm passionate about at Milestone, the average age of our employees is 31 years of age. So we have a lot of people in their 20s that are making really good money, and they're just like I mentioned to you I was. No one sat them down and talked to them about 401k or those kind of things. When I was 25 years of age, there was a man that was my manager in Memphis, Tennessee named Charlie Williams, and he sat me down and he said, there's this retirement mechanism through our company called a 401k. You need to make sure that you maximize your contribution to that. And what he said was so real and powerful in my life at that time. I went home and I told my wife, we had two small kids, 4 and 2, and I said, we're going to contribute 10% of our income to our 401k. And she goes, we can't do that. We don't have the money to do that. I said, I don't know. We're going to figure it out. So we sat down and redid our budget. We rethought everything so we could contribute 10%. So that, over time, so think about this, y'all, and I'm going to talk about what you see on the screen here. 25 years of age to now 61 years of age, when Medtronic offered the opportunity for me to retire early, I was able to do that because I made a decision when I was 25, right? And so I want you to start thinking about it now. It's not too early to start thinking about your retirement planning for it, because if you think that you're going to be able to retire on Social Security when you're 65 or 66 or whatever that age is, you're wrong. The average person today has less than $50,000 put away for their retirement. And that's scary, y'all. Be the master of your destiny and plan for your future. And this is the way to do this. So I want to share this with you really quickly, guys. So you look at the screen back here, and on the far left, what you see is early and late. And I don't want you to think that late is bad. Late just started later, okay? So early contributed a total of $40,000. Started when they were 20 years of age, $5,000 a year, and then they stopped after that 27th year, right? A total of $40,000. Now you look at the total that they earned on that. Now this is at a 9% return on investment. The stock market on average has returned about 8 to 9. But so this is at 9%. So the total they earned was $1.5 million, right? Or a 39-fold return off that $40,000. Now late didn't start till they were 28. And they contributed $5,000 a year through 65. That person contributed $190,000. They earned $1.3 million on that, or they got a 7-fold return. Now listen, that amount is a lot amount of money, right? $5,000 is nothing to sneeze at. But my point is the power of time when you start early doing something. Many of you will go to work for companies and they'll have a 401k and they'll have a company match. In other words, that's free money that they will give you. So think about that as you're taking that next step in your job. And if they have a 401k, and let's just say that like at Milestone, when you start at Milestone, they'll up to 6% of your contribution, they'll match 3% or 50% of your contributions. So let's just say for argument's sake that you're making $100,000. You put in 6%, that's $6,000. Milestone will give you another $3,000. You got an immediate 50% return on your money. Make sense, guys? Has anybody talked to you about this stuff before? Maybe, sometimes. I hope. Think about this. Think about your future. The next thing I want to talk about are challenges, and I want to spend a few minutes talking about that. I've got to wrap it up in just a few minutes. Challenges are inevitable. And I want you to know that God is with you every step of the way. And what I also want you to know is that sometimes we go through challenges, and what we learn, we don't learn what the purpose of it is at times. There are personal challenges, there are business challenges, all kinds of things. Like I had a few years ago, my niece was like my daughter. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She had 4 kids under the age of 8. And she died like a year and a half later. What also happened was within a few months after that diagnosis, and I was with her in the doctor's office when the doctor made that announcement, and it was devastating. As a young parent, all the plans that you have. Her brother that she was closest with died in a tragic accident just a few months later. So within that period of time, a year and a half, I dealt with the loss of two very, very dear members of my family. And today, I still don't know why it happened. I know that someday God will let me know when I get to heaven what the purpose was behind that. But right now, it was a struggle. And I didn't understand why. And I was angry about all those things. And what I had to learn was this. I have to learn that I'm not always going to have clarity in life, but I'm always going to have to learn to trust. And what I've learned over the course of time in the 61 years that I've been on this earth is that God has always been faithful, and I've tried to learn to trust him, even in those times that I don't understand why these things happen. And even in a business perspective, guys, things are going to happen, and you don't know why. I'm going to explain to you, to share with you a quick story. Back in, it's probably like early 90s, I had the first VP job that I was really actively pursuing. There was a new president of this division at Bard that I was working at. And he's creating this new division, and everyone said, hey, Ed, you're a lock. You're a natural. You've got all the background. You've got great relationships. You should get that job. So the guy's name was Jim Natal. So I fly to New Jersey, the corporate headquarters in Murray Hill, New Jersey, and I spend going to the corporate offices, and I spend a couple of hours talking with Jim Natal about this opportunity. And I thought it went great. I mean, I walked out there and I said, dude, this is going to happen. I'm counting the money that I'm going to make, you know. So I go home, I talk to my wife about it, I talk to Pam about it, and I said, hey, this is going really good. I think this is going to be something that I'm really going to enjoy. And then about 3 days later, I get a call from Jim Natal, and he says this. He says, you know, Ed, he goes, I thank you so much for coming up and spending some time with me. You know, you're an invaluable part of our organization, but we just don't feel like this is a good fit. You know, we're going to go in a different direction. I was devastated. You know, I had my whole career planned out. This was going to be the next step in that. Fast forward 6 months. I get to know Jim Natal a lot better. He loved to play basketball. I played a lot of basketball at the time. We were staying at a national meeting. We're at the Dallas Anatole Hotel. So when we would have these national meetings, he and I would get together and we'd play basketball together. So we're playing basketball for a couple of hours and we're walking off and he goes, hey, Ed, can I just talk to you for a second? I said, sure, Jim, what's up? He said, I want to share something with you. I want to apologize. And I said, for what? And he said, you know what? I listened to some other people that told me things about you that were not true. And that's why you didn't get that job. And I said, hey, Jim, it's all good. It's all good. What he didn't know, but what I had learned, is that God used that to keep me from a job that was going to be a bad move for me in my career. In the immediate time, I thought it sucked. But what God was doing was directing my career, and it wasn't until months later that I understood what was going on and the reason behind it. And there have been other times in my career when I've had very, very challenging jobs, and there was one time I really wanted to move away when I started with Medtronic, and it was so challenging. One day I went to lunch with my wife, and she said, I need to get you out of the house. This is so stressful on you. And so we were driving, and I remember walking. You guys have seen this in Chick-fil-A, right? So you see the guy in the cow suit. He's got the sign that says, he's got the headphones on, and he's walking back and forth saying, and the sign says, eat more chicken. That's what he does all day long. And I told Pam, I said, I want that job. I want that job. I want to have a mindless job that I don't have to think about anything for some period of time. Now, obviously, I was being facetious. But what I learned later on is that in those difficult times, when things are so stressful, is when I've grown. And I learned what it meant to be a manager. I learned a lot of the things that I utilized later on in my career was during that very difficult time when I had a boss that was bad and everything was going south and it was just trial by fire every day is when I learned the most. So when you're in those positions in your life, make sure that you're looking at things and trying to say, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me here? I felt like I was like the nation of Israel wandering in the desert, just taking lap after lap after lap. And what I'm trying to do is learn what is God saying to me in this very difficult time. I'm going to run out of time here in just a second. So real quickly, guys, what are you filling your mind with? Are you just looking at YouTube videos, TikTok? I can pull out my phone right now and I have all these different sites that look at things, whether it be Politico, Black Lives Matter, Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, all these things that I agree or may disagree with, but I read all of them. Why is that? Because you want to be well read. You want to understand what people are saying about a particular topic. You don't want to have alignment just with one thought process. You want to make sure that you're open to new ideas and understand where people are coming from. The only way that you can do that is to be well read. Are you reading your Bible every day? You should be reading Proverbs, if nothing else, every day. There's so much wisdom in Proverbs for your life, for how you deal with people, What does it say about marriage? What does it say about adultery? What does it say about all these different things? Proverbs is chock full of wisdom. I would encourage you to read that daily, if nothing else. The next thing I want to say, and I'll just be really brief about this, coachable attitude. Your attitude is going to determine how high you go in a company. If you're a jackass, pardon my language here, you're going to have a hard time advancing your career. You have to learn how to work with people, how to work with teams, how to be an influence and share your opinion and not get offended by things. You've got to make sure you have a coachable attitude, and when people give you good, honest criticism, you need to learn to accept it and evaluate yourself. It's very, very important. Destroy your paradigms. What you need to be thinking about in life, I would suggest, being a few years older than y'all, is changing your circle of friends, your circle of influence. One of my dearest friends is a guy that I met at Medtronic. His name is Kalyan Mishiraju. He's from India. His wife is a cardiopulmonologist at the Mayo Clinic. So he and I were dear friends. We would talk typically once a week or something like that. Whenever I would travel up to Minneapolis, where our corporate headquarters was located, he would invite me to his home to eat. And he's a Hindu. And what's even worse than that, he's a vegetarian. I hate vegetables. We'd go to his house, and he would make this great meal, and I would sit down and talk to him and his wife and his beautiful little girl, and I would learn about his journey to the United States. And his life was so radically different than mine, about how he had to go through testing and state by state, and you had to score a certain way to be able to pursue a career. He wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't score high enough. Super smart guy. His wife was in a different state. She scored high enough to be able to advance her career. They had an arranged marriage. Fascinating conversation. Just last week I had a conversation with a guy, had lunch with a guy that works at Milestone. His name's Jose Padilla. Jose was probably 28 years of age, and he's telling me his story. He's got 13 siblings. His dad's been married 4 times. He lived for a year in Mexico, and he was telling me all about that. And my life is richer because of the experiences that I've had with other people that don't look like me and don't think like me. Expand your horizons. You can only influence the people that you have a relationship with. So meet people. Get to know people that don't think and look like you. Travel outside the United States. How many of you traveled outside the United States? Okay. How many of you traveled some in the United States too? All right. Travel. Get to know other people throughout the world. I'll share one last story, then I'll move on. I was planning on going back to Uganda. Pam and I have been involved with Roland and Angela Mitchell with Watoto, and I was planning on going back. We had gone several years ago, had taken our family. We built a playground at one of the Watoto campuses. Watoto supports 3,000 orphan kids. They really believe that they're developing the next group, the next generation of leaders for the country of Uganda. And then the pandemic hit, and everything got put on hold. And so we were having these conversations, these Zoom calls with a doctor over there, and I contrast this just so that you'll have some insight. So I was talking to this doctor, and I said, how are you guys managing the pandemic in Uganda? And he said, well, we've closed the borders down. We're limiting access into our country. And he goes, the next thing we're doing is just trying to provide food for people so that that no one will starve to death. Compare that to the United States. It's really become a cool thing to poke fun at the United States, it seems right now. I believe it's the greatest country on earth. In the United States, we're putting checks in people's accounts. Another round just went out a few days ago. And so you contrast that with how other people live and how we live and the opportunity that we've been blessed with just because we were born here. So that's why I want to encourage you. Get to know other people that look and think differently than you do. Travel outside the United States. Meet with people so that you'll expand your horizons. And I trust me, you'll have a totally different viewpoint of the United States and what we have here. It's so wonderful. The next thing I want to share is sacred versus secular, and I'm going to close with this, guys. I think it's so important that you have the right kind of mindset, because I think in our world today, what we have a tendency to do is compartmentalize things. And so I want you to understand that the call of God on your life as a business person is just as great as the person that's been called to full-time ministry, vocationally. The guy that sits up here and sings or preaches the word or teaches or whatever. The call in your life is just as real. There's a book, if you haven't read it, maybe some of you have, A.W. Tozer, it's called The Pursuit of God. Have any of you read that book? It's a great book. Chapter 10, it calls The Sacrament of Living. And he goes into great detail in talking about the sacred versus the secular. There's another good book, too, that I would encourage you to read called Ruthless Trust by Brennan Manning. And in one of the chapters, he talks about the same thing. But what I'm going to say to you today is you need to approach your vocation, your business vocation, as if it was given unto God. That makes it sacred, right? There's no difference between what happens on Sunday and what happens on Monday. A lot of people want to get twisted on that. They think, oh, I go to church on Sunday and that's different because I'm worshiping God and I'm there in the presence of the Lord in church, or maybe now it's because you're watching it on television online. But my point is that you need to view your job in just the same way because God has placed you there with purpose. One of the greatest things that I learned when I was here at Evangel University was I realized that God had a purpose in my life. I wasn't raised in church. And so that thing that was imparted to me when I was here at Evangel was so powerful that I've carried it on. I was a school teacher first. And then as I've progressed in my career, I realized that every place that God placed me, God had a purpose in it. And I'll give you an example. So in 1988, I had this powerful encounter with the Lord in Memphis, Tennessee. When they used to have, for some of you that are my age, when you would have revivals and you'd have a speaker that would come in for a week. And there was a guy named Rich Wilkerson that came in. And he had a message. I don't know what the message was. At the end of it, at the altar call, he said that there's some here that God's calling into full-time ministry. Sorry. I started thinking of Chick-fil-A waffle fries, and I got all kind of emotional. Never before had I thought about going into ministry in my life, but I knew that God had put something on my heart that evening. I didn't understand where it would lead. I just knew I had to be obedient. So I went forward that day, and they prayed for me. And so for the next several years, I wondered, what was my life going to look like? Should I be leaving what I'm doing right now, which God was blessing? I was having an influence. We moved from Memphis to Dallas in our neighborhood, and we saw people come to know the Lord in our neighborhood. There was a young man that was 16 years of age that I was able to lead to the Lord and develop a relationship with him. His father was physically abusive. I had to go and intervene in his life to change that. Just those two things alone that happened in our neighborhood would have been worth the move. But it wouldn't have happened if God hadn't used business as a means to move us to another area and use us as a level of influence. And that's been the story of our lives for the rest of my time, up until 61 years of age. And I really believe that right now what I'm doing is having a level of influence. It doesn't look the same. My ministry doesn't look the same as a pastor's, right? But every one of the things I'm passionate about, I was just telling you at Milestone, they're so young, I'm teaching people about the value of planning for your retirement. We're going to set up something to teach people about finances. Those things are just as much a part of the ministry as the person that preaches from the pulpit. And I want you to understand that wherever you go, wherever God's leading you guys, God has a purpose in it. And I want to share this last thing, and then I'll be quiet and I'll answer any questions that you might have. Some of you may be really, really concerned about the pandemic and what the job opportunities that may be for you. And I would say this. It sounds trite to say it, but don't worry about it. God's in control. As I said, when I graduated from here in 1981, interest rates were at 19%. Unemployment was at 10%. We were in the middle of a recession. I was concerned about what I'm going to be able to find a job, but God provided a job for me in Memphis, Tennessee. I became a school teacher. And God, every job that I've had since then, I can see the hand of God directing me in each of those areas. So I want to say to you, God's got it. Give it all to Him. And I'm so thankful to be able to spend a few minutes with you to kind of share my insights, and I hope it was beneficial for you. So thank you. So having said that, are there any questions anybody has? Anything? Personally, professionally? Yes? What sort of businesses was I a part of? So the first sales job I had was working with General Foods, and I sold everything from Maxwell House coffee to Country Time lemonade, Jello Brand pudding pops. Funny story I'll share with you. So I had this freezer that ran off of the cigarette lighter. Nobody has cigarette lighters in cars anymore, but at that time they had cigarette lighters. And I had this freezer that I would keep full of Jello Brand pudding pops. Every kid in the neighborhood loved me. they would all come knocking on my door. Hey, can Mr. Ed come out and play? Really what they wanted was a Jello Brand pudding pop. They didn't want to play with me. But yeah, so that, and then I'd always wanted to get into healthcare sales. I thought it'd be really interesting, medical device sales. And so the next job was the Evangel division of BARD. I worked in the OR, saw open hearts, total joints, all kinds of cases. Fascinating job. And then after that, advanced to where I started working in corporate accounts. Then I went to work at Medtronic. And at Medtronic, it was based on electronic stimulus. So the first external pacemaker was invented by a guy that was the founder of Medtronic. His name was Earl Bakken, back in Minnesota. And then there was derivatives products for your heart, for pain management, all those things. It's a big company. It's about $30 billion in revenue right now, something like that. But yeah, I've been blessed, super blessed. Any other questions? Yes?
I will give you this mic so everybody can hear your question.
So you talked about lifelong learning, and I'm just curious to whether you pursued higher education or what opportunities you took to continue to develop yourself and just disciplines that you've practiced to continue to learn.
No, that's a great question. I've had the opportunity in the companies that I've worked for that they would provide things that would be training, like, for example, like right now, most recently, one of the things that Milestone uses is this thing called Culture Index. Have any of you heard of it? Have you heard of DISC? So you evaluate behavior traits and so on, how they might apply. So there have been things like that that through the course of my career that I've gotten to know. We're using strength finders, and one of the things that we're going to be doing is teaching our management team how to use that with their respective teams. So those kind of things have challenged me to learn things that I wasn't very familiar with. And also had the opportunity to go, like I've had negotiation courses like at Harvard and dealing with all kinds of people from all over the world. It was a fascinating week, just talking to people about where they came from and so on. So I've not pursued anything like an MBA or anything like that, but I've had lots of opportunities with the companies I work for to try to do things and learn things differently. But it's also been challenging as it relates to just the product knowledge too, how these products would work. Yes?
Yes, this is about servant leadership. And I read blogs and some advice given on online platforms, and they said, take care of yourself, don't trust anybody. But you said, take care of the team first and put yourself as a second. So my question is, what does servant leadership looks like? And if you could give an example, that would be great. Thank you.
No, I think there's lots of examples. I'll tell a story, if that's okay. So one of the guys that I've been talking about culture development at Milestone, we were very big on having, our tenets are faith, family, excellence, right? And we believe that we're in the people business. We're not in the home services business. And so I've been talking to Roland Mitchell. Roland Mitchell's an Evangel grad that I got to know a year ago at this event that Robert and I were at out in Southern California. And so we've been talking about culture, and he shared a story with me that was really powerful. You may not know this, but Roland and Angela lost one of their sons tragically in high school, and it was devastating to him. And he tells me this story. He goes, Ed, this is what our servant leadership looks like. He said, on the day of the funeral, Dan Cathy, who's the CEO of Chick-fil-A, flies in and spends the entire day with me and my family, just helping in any way that he can. Now keep in mind, Dan Cathy has this huge business. There are 2,700 stores across the United States, but yet he takes the time for one of the franchisee's owners, right, to fly in and spend the day with him. That, to me, epitomizes what a leader is supposed to do. It's about your team. Before you can effectively lead, I'll just close with this. Before you can effectively lead, they have to know that you care. And so it may look different for each person. There's not going to be the same way that you engage with some people. Some people are going to be much more open about their family. Some people may not be. But it's up to you as a leader to get to know them and get insights into their life. And that's, I believe, honestly, what Jesus would do. We're not supposed to be leaders like everyone else. We're supposed to be different. And so I think it's by serving. He shared another story. He said when he first went to his first national sales meeting, he said he put his bag down outside this hotel, and he said Dan Cathy immediately ran up and grabbed it. And he's going like, wait, you shouldn't do that. You're the CEO. He goes, no, I've got this. This is what we do. So it's by how you act. It's not by what you say. It's by how you act. Make sense? Any other questions? Nothing? No questions about like what's it like to be 61 years of age? 1 foot in the grave?
Too young for that.
Too young for that? Listen, thanks again for your time. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.